Welcome to Secrets from the Saddle podcast. I'm Sylvie, your host, fellow cyclist, bike club founder, cycling coach, bike race junkie, just truly super passionate about cycling. My journey with cycling started 20 years ago when I opened a spin studio, started a women's race team, and founded a women's only cycling club called Cycle Fit Chicks. I'm super thrilled to reveal all aspects that make the world of cycling operate. I'm so excited to be able to bring you interesting people from around the world, pro cyclists, recreational cyclists, coaches, event organizers, bike shop owners, everything and everyone you need to know or ever wondered about when it comes to cycling. I know you'll enjoy this episode. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Secrets from the Saddle, All Things Cycling podcast with your host, Sylvie here. And we've got our Coach's Corner for Friday. How exciting is that? How much information are you guys getting? I know that this year I'm probably going to be talking a whole lot about training for Unbound just because I'm just super, engrossed in this because I've got to basically set myself up to survive. But before we get into it, I just want to shout out to some new countries that have started listening to our podcast. We have new listeners in Iran. Shouts out to you guys. And our listenership is up 36% in the new year to over 265,000 downloads. Wowza. And let's not forget that this podcast episode is sponsored by Dow Training Systems and Cycle Fitness for your winter training needs. If you are starting to get on your bike, jumping on Swift, and you have some training or race goals and you're not quite sure how to get and develop your proper technique and build your endurance fitness, check out this winter training program. It's from January to April. You can join anytime. It's specifically geared towards those who have goals for endurance and technique and just basically staying fit to be super strong in the spring. And if you resonate with that, might be the program for you. It's great culture and community, integrating Swift in with skills and development and group riding. So hit up this website, cyclingskillspro.com. Use the code word gravel at checkout to get 20% off your first month and jump in today. Don't miss another week trying to figure it out yourself. All the training is there for you with this program. So let's get into today. We are going to be talking about planning your bike maintenance for the year ahead. Now, I know it's in January and everybody's like, well, Sylvie, my brake is on the trainer. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to tell you a little story about that because I just got my trainer. I just got my bike tuned up like last week. And I was like, oh my God, there's things going on my bike that I'm just like, there's something wrong. And I really do need, like things were happening, like my pulley wheels fell apart and things like that. So I was like, I need to have it tuned up. And I know what you're thinking, like, I don't want to take my bike off the trainer because I don't want to lose time training, right? So I was thinking the same thing. And I don't know about you, but around here we have VeloFix. They'll basically drive to your house, take your bike off the trainer, fix it up in their van, and then put it back on the trainer, and you have little to no downtime. So I highly recommend that you search out VeloFix. I know they're in the States and in Canada. It's a franchise, and book in a bike tune-up with them because one of the things is that my chain was so stretched. Like, I didn't even realize that. It wasn't like that in the summer because I know that I checked it. And I don't know, maybe it was just because we started training inside in October, but it is like, I can't even go into my 4 easiest gears because it just skips over. It's so stretched. So I had to order a new chain, and I had fixed my pulley wheels and I put them on incorrectly. Apparently there's a top, a higher and a lower. Did you know that? I didn't know that. So these are little things that you learn. You think you know things because you're like, oh, here they are. And they were written on them too, but I didn't even notice. And I learned something. I learned a couple things. So I was certainly really grateful to have had that looked at when I did, because we got another 3 months of training inside. And when we're doing, 6 hours a week on our trainer, things start, you just don't know until you're like, oh, this feels kind of weird. And so I have I have tips for each season. So you can share this, you can save this. And also don't forget to go to our YouTube channel for the podcast and subscribe there so you don't miss a podcast episode, because everything goes out there. If you're not subscribed on your favorite or following us on your favorite podcast platform. So there's different things we need to be thinking about: winter, spring, summer, and fall, to be taking care of our bikes. So since it's the winter here, I'm just going to start with winter. I do recommend, now that I've gone through this experience, that maybe after, how everybody like rushes to get their bike tuned up before the season, you might want to get it tuned up before you get it on the trainer. Just saying, it probably doesn't have to be extensive, but I take care of my bike, but I just like, I don't know everything. And so this is probably what I'm going to be doing. Book in one that's like the full tune, and then the other one is just like, a checkup before you get on the trainer. So here's some things to think about when the winter, and it depends what kind of cyclist you are. Like maybe you aren't on the trainer and you literally do just hang up your bike and get on your skis, or maybe this is a transition. You start doing other kind of training. But let's talk about cold storage first. Cold storage, the garage, I know I have one bike on the trainer. I have one bike in storage in the house, and everything else is in the garage. My gravel bikes, my mountain bikes, all those things. And here's the things you want to do before hanging them up or before storing them for the winter. And that is kind of washing off your bike and components. Because I have experienced this with bikes that I don't typically maintain as well as others, is that you can apparently, well, here's something that's happened to me. The chain rusts, and then, you can clean the chain and degrease and clean it, and then the rust will go away depending on how bad it is, or how, if it's just like surface. But sometimes it can cause discoloration of the paint or finish. That's never happened to me, but it could happen to somebody. Corrosion of the metal components, depending on, what kind of garage you have it stored in, and maybe if you washed it down and didn't dry it, or you hung it up wet, whatever things. And then there's a rusty chain, so make sure you degrease and clean the drivetrain, chain, cassette, chain rings, and derailleur. And if you're kind of questioning about those, take them in. Take your bike in, get it tuned up so you don't have to think about it, because it is pretty important. Now, here's for all those electric bikers who have e-bikes, and I didn't think about this, but bring your bike in to a warm environment and keep the battery topped up, because you know what it's like. The batteries will drain in the winter. And you certainly don't want to have issues with your e-bike come the summer, because e-bikes are still kind of new, and to me it sounds like a possibly a cheap, an expensive fix if something happens to rust. And here's another thing I didn't know about tubeless tires. Bikes with tubeless tires, bring the wheels in, because, if, like, I'm in Quebec, Canada, so it can get to -20, -40, sometimes really cold, and the seal can freeze and dry out. Probably just crack too. So if you really like your tubeless tires, bring your wheels in at least and leave the frame outside. Here's bikes with hydraulic brakes, more like your mountain bikes. Avoid hanging them vertically. Now, I didn't know this, because I hang all my bikes typically in the garage vertically from the ceiling, and I know a lot of people mount their bikes that way too. Avoid hanging them vertically for long periods of time, because you want to put them horizontal to avoid needing to possibly purge the air out of the brakes or bleed the brakes in the spring. I don't know. Yes or no? Has that happened to you? I'm not sure, but that was one of their tips, or one of the tips I'm giving you. Now, remember I was telling you about the chain? If you can, get a chain, one of those little chain tools that measures the length of your chain, like the age of your chain, like how stretched it is. It's, $25. It's worth it to check your chain a couple times in the season. Like me, chain completely stretched. Like I could probably take a whole chain link out. So keeping your eye on your chain, if you're a big hammer person, big ring all the time, always chain stretch and chain, got lots of pressure on your chain because you just love the hammer, not even using your gears. You might want to be checking your chain fairly frequently for stretch. And if it's past 75% wear, you should probably consider changing it, or at least after the season. Trainer cassette. Here's just something to think about if you've got a direct drive train on your, like if you have like a Tax Flow or Pseudo, one of those direct drive trainers, is that keep an eye on your cassette. After a couple seasons, you might need to swap it out for a new one. So that's something I was going to start keeping my eye on. All right, so that was winter. Now we move into early spring. So now everybody's like into the winter. This is things you need to consider this spring, while taking your bike off the trainer and getting it ready. While you're inside, want to think about a couple things is replacing the rear shift cable at least once a year. Sometimes gunk gets in there and it can cause the shifting to not be as responsive, so you want to keep an eye on that, especially if you clean it a lot and you're into gritty riding. So keep an eye on that. Clean or check your chain for wear. So we're just gonna have to repeat that over and over again. And here's a big thing for people who sweat. That's not me, but people who sweat a lot. I don't know if you've seen those pictures on social of the corrosion that can happen underneath your bar tape and on the top tube, or the headset. So it can seep into your headset. So there's another reason to bring your bike in for a complete tune, because if you're corroding stuff, like imagine going for a header, because your front handlebars broke. Clean and degrease, replace the bar tape. Maybe you need to replace the bearings. So just to keep an eye, like if you sweat a lot, then be really conscious about checking your components before you go out for a ride and do those crazy descents. I'm just saying, like, just because it's carbon doesn't mean there isn't a component in there that could be affected by sweat. You know what I'm saying? All right, late spring. So I guess early spring might be April, maybe May is more the late spring, when you might be caught in some rain or some crappy wet weather. Check your bottom bracket, your bearings, inspect your headset. So lube everything. And here's another thing, check your tire, the wear on your tire. And the way you check that is like, you kind of run your finger over the top, and if it's not rounded and it's more like you're feeling like an edge, like it's kind of flat in the top, that's the time to change it, because your tire is no longer round. And if you decide to take a nice corner, you might slip out because there's no traction there anymore. Summer, let's just repeat that. Drivetrain, clean and lube, check. Clean your chain periodically, maybe even take it off and do a little dunking and before putting it back on. Check your tires in July. And here's something for everybody who has disc brakes. Now, just because you have disc brakes doesn't mean that they don't wear down. Okay, it doesn't mean that you don't have to replace those. Those are just like your tire brakes. The more grit, the more you're using, the more you're on them, they do wear down. The pads wear down. So being mindful and checking your disc brakes, because imagine those were to fail on you. Holy crap. Here's a little tip on how you can check the width of your brake pad to make sure they're good. So if you have 3 business cards, it sounds like pretty thick when I think about it, but your brake pad, a good brake pad should be 3 business cards wide. So take 3 business cards and go down there and check the brake pads of your bike. And also, sometimes if they're squeaking, it might be because you got some grease in there and you're going to have to take them off and scrape off that grease, put them back on, because that will not give you the optimum braking. I learned that from a friend of mine where I bought my bike, because now I have a bike with disc brakes, so I have to be kind of conscious about that and check them myself, because if you're new to having a bike with disc brakes, you're not quite sure, these are things to take into consideration, because once you wear down the rotor and the calipers, it's like you have to change everything. It's kind of like your car, right? You wear it down metal on metal, and then time to check them. And so that's pretty much, all the tips. I mean, once the fall, I'll just repeat myself, where in the fall, you're going to clean up your bike, dust it off, give it a good cleaning, check all your components, maybe set up that tune-up, check your chain before you put it back on the trainer. So I hope you enjoyed these little tips for full season of, creating the best maintenance plan for the year ahead, and just some things to keep your eye on, and take a little look. Maybe now that you've listened to the podcast, go over to your bike and give it a once over. And I highly recommend go checking. I'll put if I remember, I always remember. I'll put a link to that chain measuring tool for you. Get it. It's cheap. It's worth putting in with the rest of your tools, so that you can just do a quick check of like basically all your bikes, all the chains on your bike, and something that the mechanics use. So yeah, lots of great things in here. And for those sweaters, people who sweat a ton, don't take your bike off the trainer, or don't get on your bike until you do a, replacing the bar tape and checking everything underneath, because you wouldn't want to have something happen later on in the season because everything's been compromised because your sweat ate through all your components, right? So with that, I hoped you enjoyed this little tip session on bike maintenance. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube, or follow the channel on YouTube, and also on Instagram. And if you have any questions, YouTube's probably a good place to go place them, or I guess on Instagram, but I prefer YouTube. It's a great platform to share. And anyways, just enjoy it there. So have an amazing day, and please share this with your friends who are wondering or maybe not so good about taking care of their bikes. This might be a really good little checklist for them. All right, have an amazing day, and we'll see you on the next podcast. Thank you so much for spending this time with me on the Secrets from the Saddle podcast, learning more about sighting people, places, and things that make cycling such an exciting sport. I am so glad you stopped by today. Please leave me a review if you feel so moved to do so. I would love to hear your feedback. And if you could take 1 second to share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it, I would be forever grateful. Also, if you could please leave me a review if you feel so moved by going to iTunes and leaving me an honest thought and an honest comment, telling me what you think, and most importantly, tell me what you'd like to hear more of. It would really help me to bring more great, inspiring cycling stories to you. Until then, have an amazing day, make sure you ride your bike, and don't forget to visit my YouTube channel if you'd like to see the full version of this podcast live.